All right, so today we're gonna cover shutdowns. And like, quite frankly, this is a really tricky topic to discuss because there's a lot of nuance to it. There's a lot of people with opinions on both sides of whether guys should, take 3 months off from throwing or whether guys should just keep it moving. And like, I've gone back and forth on this for the last few years, especially with having athletes that we're training. And through a lot of the research and a lot of our experience of training these guys, found is maybe shutdowns aren't all they're cracked out to be. To build on that, like, they may be doing more harm than good. I think that's important when we factor in what decisions we're making for our athletes when they step in the door. So just going over all this, we're going to cover reasons that guys shut down, okay? Reasons that I think are against shutting down, and then my recommendations based on, again, research and experience. Okay, so the big thing that gets cited when say, hey, should I shut down, is Mlb Pitchmark Guidelines. Okay. So I'm just going to go through those guidelines for pitchers ages 15 to 18, although they don't really change at 13 to 14. But the big ones: do not exceed 100 combined innings pitched in a 12-month period. Take at least 4 months off from competitive pitching every year, including at least 2 to 3 continuous months from all overhead throwing. Okay. Make sure to warm up. Set and follow pitch counts and rest periods. Avoid playing for multiple teams. Don't pitch in multiple games on the same day. Monitor signs of fatigue. And you shouldn't pitch for 3 straight days. So, of those that I listed, I agree with most of them. Like, most of them fall under the category of workload management, proper warm-up, proper rest. A competent coach should be able to help athletes through that period. Okay? Pretty easy, pretty simple. The one that I think is most is the biggest one here is including taking 2 to 3 continuous months off from all overhead throwing. Okay. Now, if we're gonna say that that's what we recommend, well, is there evidence behind it? If so, like, what is it? And so, these recommendations, they've also, that's the taking 2 to 3 or 2 to 4 months off from throwing. That's not just from PitchSmart, ASMI, and the Fleissig team and James Andrews, those guys, they've been saying that for quite some time. But again, is there data to support their recommendations? And thankfully, there was a group of researchers at the University of Michigan. They put together 14 studies as part of a systematic review. Okay, so that review takes data from all these different studies to make sense of what should go on. So yeah, the study included 2,400 individual pitchers ranging from youth levels to pro. Okay, and what they did is they looked at different studies that evaluated risk factors for injury. and what they found. So I encourage you guys to read the full study. I'll share it with you. But they said their conclusion was high-level evidence is lacking to substantiate the current safety guidelines for baseball players. Only weak evidence exists to causally link risk factors such as age, position, and pitching volume to elbow injuries amongst baseball players, and no evidence exists to support any consistent causal risk factors related to shoulder injuries. Well-designed prospective cohort studies are necessary to uncover risk factors related to injury amongst baseball players from youth to professional level. So, basically, evidence that not following the safety guidelines cause injury doesn't exist, despite the topic being researched for decades. Fleissig and the ASMI crew has been going since the mid '80s, I believe. And this is what they've been researching. Is injuries of baseball players, and trying to look at so many different ways, and still don't have a lot of good answers. So this paper also looked at Pitchmark risk factors. Okay, so risk factors for injury in baseball players, and USA Baseball and Pitchmark also put together risk factors, so separate from their recommendations. Risk factors for evidence for a relationship to injury include pitching while fatigued, throwing too many innings over the course of the year, not taking enough time off from baseball, too many pitches, pitching on consecutive days, playing for multiple teams, pitching while you're hurt, not following strength and conditioning routine. There's a few others in there. And they looked at all of those individual factors and said, is there a relationship to injury? And they only found it with one, and it was throwing too many innings over the course of the year. And they only found that with youth baseball players. So from ages 9 to 14, if you threw over 100 innings in a year, there's a strong link that could cause your injury. Okay? But a lot of their risk factors are common sense, logical things. Don't throw too many pitches. Don't pitch while you're fatigued. Don't play on multiple teams throughout your season. Okay? A lot of common sense practices here, not following a strength and conditioning routine. But guess what? Even all of that with logic and common sense and an idea of what we know about the body doesn't have a causal link to injury. Okay? So, what that means for me is that when there are so many factors that can cause an injury in baseball players, and we try to whittle it down to one or two or three different things, we just can't do it, right? There's so many variables in the equation that attempts to isolate one or two is difficult. Can't do it. Scientists have spent years, careers researching injury, and the data even from other sports is not robust. So yeah. Okay. So that's the gist of it, right? If we're citing Pitchmark Guidelines, their recommendations aren't substantiated by data. They're recommendations. Take what they want. Second reason. Okay. So, if you finish a long season and you get your range of motion rechecked, and there's a big drop-off from where you were in the previous offseason, that's a cause for concern, right? We see it maybe not a cause for concern, but definitely a red flag, right? We see it with our pro guys, especially, who are gone for 8 months at a time. They leave in February, they come back in September or October. We'll see guys, they lost 20 degrees of shoulder flexion. They're lacking, they're usually at 40 degrees of IR. Now they're at 20 or 15. Some guys even lack ER too. So, that's why having data over a period of time with athletes is so important, so we can see changes. And then if those changes occur, and guys are feeling like crap at the end, after the end of the season, we know that this needs to be priority number one when you step in the door. So, this, in my opinion, is the best reason to take time off from the ground. I'm down in range. I'm lacking range of motion. And, probably don't feel great either, especially pro arms, because they have just such a long season and it's continuous. High school guys, college guys, they'll get breaks here and there, right? But especially those pro guys, that's when you'll see those guys usually want to take 2 to 4 weeks off, sometimes 8, depending on when they finished up. But even if your range of motion is lacking, those guys just finished the season and they were throwing at high velocities and they made it through. So, begs the question, maybe you don't need to completely shut down. I think when you're lacking at that stage of the year, you can still keep the arm moving light, so that you're able to maintain some stress on the tissue. Okay. Now, again, I said that the Pitchmark Guidelines didn't have a lot of evidence to support their data or their recommendations, and I would say there's weak evidence that lacking range of motion can cause injury risk or raise injury risk. And changes in individual athletes' range of motion over time at multiple points in the year, and that relationship to injury, right? I don't think that's been studied. Or I haven't seen it. And so, that's just based off of my experience and working with Rob and Key, understanding what we're looking at when we have our athletes. Okay. The third reason that people often take off or shut down for a long period of time is we've always done it this way. Always done it. That's a poor reason to do anything in life, right? We always did it this way, so we're just gonna keep doing it this way. That's not get informed, right? Be in charge of your career. Don't just take a backseat approach to it. Taking a ton of time off, if you want to get better at baseball, ain't it? That's also I'm going to touch on this later, but game's changing. You can't just sit back and say I'm going to get my arm together. I'm going to start throwing February 1 or January 1, and for a pro guy, January 15th, roll into spring training and figure things out and hope by April 5th I'm good to go. I don't have that time. Unless you're a well-established big leaguer. And even those guys, if you're a well-established big leaguer, you're not taking 3 months off. At least not in today's game. Maybe in the early 2000s, even early 2010s, guys did that, but not anymore. Okay, so reasons against shutting down. First, before I go on, do you guys have questions on this? Okay. So, reason one. I want to get better. Kind of obvious, right? But most of the guys that we have in here are specializing in baseball by their freshman or sophomore year. Okay, they dedicate their lives to trying to get better at baseball. You know, that's their focus, that's their goal, and they come here to do it. And in the spring, summer, and fall, we have to deal with the demands of competition, right? That's the priority. Is in the spring, it's your high school season. In the summer, it's travel ball, and fall, it's usually travel ball as well. Some schools do stuff too, but we're always like, that's always the priority, is guys being prepared to go out and pitch on weekends or pitch in their high school season. So we never get a chunk of time to dedicate to velocity development, mechanical changes, pitch design, command training, anything like that, because you're always playing. So, you know, I think that's like, it's rare that you get 4 months. You only get it once a year. You only get 4 months where you're not playing. And, you know, it's neither here nor there. Like, I'm not gonna say like, oh, you shouldn't play fall ball, or you shouldn't do this or do that, or that's just the nature of the beast. And as trainers, we have to navigate that as best we can. So yeah, I mean, let's just say you followed Pitchmark Guidelines and you shut down from October 15th to January 15th. High school season rolls around March 1, gives you like 6 weeks to get the arm in shape. 6 weeks after taking 3 months off is barely enough time to even get close to where you were. If you do, you're lucky. If you're not lucky, you could be hurt. It could just be way worse. So, you know, keeping that in mind is very important. Where if you have athletes that want to get better, you gotta throw. So, yeah, like the other big side of this is just the reps you get, right? If you want to throw harder, you need reps. Okay? If you want to throw a better off-speed pitch, you need reps, and a lot of them. If you want to throw more strikes, you need reps. If you want to improve your mechanics, you need reps. Where's the best time to get it when you don't have to deal with competition? Right? When you don't have the demands of a season. It's from November to February. Right. So yeah, mandating shutdowns, if you're serious about player development, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Second reason. Skill level. Not high enough for your goals. Okay. So, right, we work with a lot of high school athletes. A lot of them have aspirations to play collegiate baseball. Most of them do. If your goal is to play Division I baseball, right, at a certain point in time, you have to be throwing at a certain speed, right? Figure D1 baseball is, you know, upper 80s, low 90s. D2 baseball, you'd say like low 80s to high 80s, depending on the school you're going to. D3 baseball, high 70s, low to mid 80s. So if you're a junior in high school and you throw 82, you got to throw harder, right? If your goal is to play Division I baseball, you have to throw harder. If you want to throw 87, 88 next spring or next summer, you can't do it by not throwing for 2 to 3 months. How are you going to get better at throwing? Right? Pretty common sense stuff. But again, you're not good enough and you need to get better, or you want to get better. We got to do that by training. All right, so reason number 3. Your muscles, your tendons, your ligaments, they respond to stress. Okay? The body is great at responding to stress. Right? So I would say the easiest example of this is in the weight room. What happens when you start working out? You get stronger. You also gain the capacity to lift more weight. Okay? On the other hand, if you lift for say 6 months straight, you take a month off, 2 months off, and you go back in and you try to lift really heavy, what happens? Not gonna be able to. Or if you do, and you get 70, 85% of the weight up, same weight, you're sore as hell for days, if not weeks, right? Because what happened? We overstressed the body. So we can take a similar approach when it comes to throwing, right? When we're throwing, right, and throwing at high levels, the muscles, tendons, ligaments that are responsible for throwing and accelerating and decelerating the arm are going under a level of micro trauma. Okay? If soreness is excessive, right? We've applied too much stress to the tissue. If soreness is very minimal or non-existent, we know that the athletes are responding well to that stress and can continue to receive stress. Okay. However, if we stop throwing, we stop applying stress. Okay? If we stop applying stress to our bodies, they lose the ability to recover from stress. And what we found in here is if you stop throwing for a long period of time, the on-ramping process of dealing with stress is much more difficult. I guess it was 2 full off seasons ago. It was our first go of PDP, a full winter. And I remember talking with Matt and Rob about this, hey, should we shut these guys down? Guys are in, they want to train, they want to throw. And we said, let's shut everyone down. At least 3 weeks, if not 4, 5, or 6, depending on the age and the athlete. And when guys on-ramped following those shutdowns, they weren't super clean. I wouldn't say guys weren't getting hurt, but just not bouncing back great. Velocities weren't going up the way we had hoped. In between sessions, guys were throwing hard, on Tuesday, and by Friday, Saturday, they still just weren't feeling fresh. So, you know, looking back, I attribute that to them going from, you know, too quick of an on-ramp period, right? Going from a period of complete inactivity, not gonna throw, to a period of, hey, in 4 or 5 weeks we're gonna let it rip. Okay, so like, walking that back, it's like, well then, or I'll actually repeat that. So what we did last off season, rather than a complete shutdown for guys, is we deloaded them. So take a few weeks off if you need it, 1 to 2. But otherwise, let's keep the arm moving, but very light. 20 to 30 throws, maybe, you know, catch out to 45 feet, right? Maybe 60, or go just plyos into the wall if you want to do that. But it gives you time to keep the arm moving, keep applying low levels of stress, and you don't lose that ability that you spent the last, call it, 9 months building up. So is someone who's researched this extensively is Dr. Keith Barr, who's from UC Davis. And a lot of his research involves like animal and in vitro studies about how tendons can respond to stress, and tendons and ligaments can respond to stress. And, you know, so it's unclear if like we can apply these findings that, you know, you see in a test tube to baseball players, but there's at least some evidence pointing in this direction that continuous low-grade stress can build up resiliency and stiffness in our ligaments. Okay, if we're able to get that, we're having, you know, a better chance of staying healthy throughout our, you know, our careers. Okay, you know, and if you don't stress a ligament, it becomes weaker and pliable. You don't want pliable ligaments. You want stiff, strong ligaments. Right? So, you know, like in some regards, this points to how continuing to throw is really protective in nature, and not something that's going to cause injury. Okay? So those are the reasons. I'm going to go over recommendations real quick. Any questions on this stuff so far? Okay, sweet. All right, so recommendations. So, rather than a shutdown, a deload period. Just talked about this. Deload greater than shutdown. Okay. In terms of like actual a structure of what that'll look like and what we're doing when we plan out our programs and our off seasons for guys is, you know, depending on the athlete, like you could take a few weeks off, right? Especially guys that threw a lot in the spring, summer, and fall. If you logged some innings, and you want some time off, whether it's for physical or psychological reasons, you know, if you don't want to touch a ball in early November or, you know, late on when you finish your season, that's totally cool. But let's call this like 0 to 3 weeks of no throwing, right? If someone doesn't want to stop throwing, I think that's okay. That's probably good. But then following that, you know, 2 to 4 weeks of like very, very light. Very light. 30, 40 throws, 45 to 60 feet. Or you can do plyos and lock in on maybe a mechanical thing that you want to work on. But again, just at very low speeds. That meets the requirement of continuing to apply stress that we just went over. So after this period, 4 to 6 week on ramp. So during this period, we'll gradually start to increase volume, intensity, and frequency in our throwing. Right. In this first part, we're just going to be making like 30 throws, maybe 40. And then over here, that first week, maybe you're throwing 3 to 4 days a week, bumping that volume to call it 40 to 60 throws. And then week 2, progressively a little bit more. Week 3, start to add some intensity behind it. Week 4 and week 5, we're starting to really like ramp up and be pretty close to 100%. Okay, that in my opinion is like a safe, smooth buildup. There might be bumps in the road, but most athletes are able to follow this type of progression. Let's say like the on-ramp period somewhat ends when you reach a point where you're throwing at 90 to 95% of your max effort and there's little to no swings. When you can check that box, that means that you're good to let it rip. If you can't, and some athletes will struggle with this, that 90%, it takes them a couple days to get back to it. Like, you just got to keep repeating that or back off. But you know, hey, maybe we do like a couple extra days at 90% before we really push that 100% number and try to set records and push, you know, that last bit of velocity development. Okay. So this on ramp will lend into, like, for most guys, velocity development. So in his velo development phase, right, max effort throws, they could be pull downs, they could be max effort bullpens, they could be, you know, positional throws, like, you know, catcher throwing from the crouch, outfielder fielding a ground ball or a fly ball, something like that. Anything where you're throwing as hard as you can is good. That satisfies this need for, or this like category of velocity development. In my opinion, they should be part of a structured throwing program throughout the off season. You know, once you reach that, once you're on ramped, right? We need to throw as hard as we can, because guess what happens when the spring rolls around? You gotta throw as hard as you can. You know, games start, you gotta be ready to go. Especially if you're trying to earn a roster spot or earn playing time. You know, you don't want to show up and like, oh yeah, arm's still like working back, like I'm at, you know, 80%. I'm at, you know, I'm 5 miles an hour down from fall. Don't worry, I'll get there. Might not. Seasons are short too. So yeah, definitely continuing maximum effort throwing throughout the off season. And then as athletes need it, right? You're crushing weights and crushing throwing. Sometimes you need a deload. What we've done is just deal with that on an athlete by athlete basis. You know, if you're not hitting numbers are starting to fall off and you're not feeling fresh, that's a sign that you might need to take a week to 10 days, just dial back the training, and then put yourself in a position to dial it back up when you're ready. So yeah, you know, an off season structured like this, right, allows us to continue to develop the skills of baseball with, in my opinion, as little risk as possible. Okay, by continuing to throw rather than completely shutting down, we're avoiding atrophy of the muscles, tendons, and ligaments. And you know, we're also setting ourselves up better for when the time has come to build up an on-ramp. So That's where I feel on this, and I do think that just to like kind of close is like we talk about this deload and this on ramp period. That can be 8 to 10 weeks. Like this like deload period for some of our athletes is going to be the 4 to 5 week, and then it's another 4 to 5 weeks for an on ramp. So we're not advocating for year-round velo work, okay? Especially for younger athletes. But I feel like at times it's not that far off from the recommendations, where it's like, yeah, like we shouldn't be like competitively playing in games the whole year. But like having a seasonality to training and a progression and a build-up is also part of this. Part of this and something that's definitely needed. And like the current state of baseball is, you want to succeed, you got to throw hard and you got to throw nasty stuff. The best time to do that, the best time to develop those skills is November to February. You have no games, you have nothing else going on. If you want to come out in the spring ready to go, time to train. So, that's all I got. Questions? Comments?
The only comment, or not really a comment, but I listen to Cressy's podcast all the time, and he had a recent one about this.
Yeah.
I don't know if you listened to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he talked about, like, I think it was 40% of his guys throw all year round. I think that was his percentage was.
Yeah.
It was like 30 to 40. But the one cool thing I took away from that is, like, his deload kind of thing for some of the guys is, like, they just, like, throw a football around.
Yep. Actually, we've had a few guys, just, hey, I want to throw the football for 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah. And I thought that was pretty cool. It's not really something I thought about, but, I thought that was just to keep the feel, and you're still stressing the ligaments a little bit.
Yeah.
And, I just thought that was pretty cool.
Yep.
So.
Yep. Yeah, I'm a fan of, you'll probably see it pick up a little bit more, guys throwing the football around. Guys didn't do that a lot in the fall, for whatever reason. But I think you'll start seeing guys like, hey, I'm not really throwing a baseball, like, let me just throw the football instead. Like, then that's totally cool. That's great. Throw something else. Learn how to throw a football. Some guys don't know how to throw a football. So.
I feel like most guys don't.
I barely do. But yeah, football is a good substitute. There's research on that, actually, that like internal rotation and elbow extension.
Okay.
Those speeds are lower in a football throw. Kind of makes common sense, but those speeds are lower compared to baseball. Also lower compared to like javelin too, I think.
Yeah.
There's a neat study that looks at that stuff. Compares the 4. There's like 3 or 4 different throwing. Maybe tennis was the other one, like overhead activity. But yeah, it's good.